Comprehension is an extensive topic, so it has been divided into 3 PowerPoints. The first PowerPoint deals with defining comprehension and the 3 factors that are involved with it. Each part is approximately 9 to 10 minutes long. Time and again, you have heard comprehension referred to as the construction of meaning. Ideally, that meaning matches what the author actually meant and what the text actually has to offer. However, any 2 individuals might walk away from a reading of the same text with slightly different takes on what was presented. One might have a much more in-depth or thorough grasp of the information, while the other reader's grasp is not as well developed or perhaps even inaccurate. Have you ever asked a student to explain something that has happened in a story or a piece of information and a selection and wonder, did we both read the same thing? Yes, you did, but the takeaway was much different for each of you. Why? Comprehension is an interactive process that involves the reader, the text, and the context or purpose for the reading. That gives a lot of areas for variation in the construction of meaning. Let's look first at the possible variations within the reader. Remember the 4-processor model? We know that reading is largely a language-based activity. So, how well developed and integrated are the child's phonological, orthographic, semantic or meaning and context processors when it comes to the task of reading? What background knowledge about the topic itself does the child have? What reading skills and strategies does he bring to the task of reading? What attitude toward reading and/or about the topic or selection itself does he have? On a more general basis, what is his attention, cognitive abilities, memory, work habits, reading stamina, etc. like? All these factors play into constructing meaning successfully or unsuccessfully in some cases. Let's take a closer look at background or prior knowledge, which has gotten a great deal of attention when it comes to comprehension. You might hear it referred to as schema or schemata. Even for a narrow topic such as poodles, a judge for the National Kennel Club would have a more highly developed schema for poodles than a person who happens to have one for a family pet. Or think about the background experience and medical knowledge a physician brings to the text that makes it easier for him to understand an article in a medical journal. But that same physician might struggle to make sense out of a blog describing how to break down and repair an automatic transmission. It's probably safe to say that no 2 people have exactly the same schemata. This is the interesting part. Many times we as teachers don't have much control over the prior knowledge that a child brings to the text. That's why we have to be so cautious in assessing this beforehand and taking measures to build the necessary background knowledge that will facilitate comprehension. But we not only have to know our student's schema in regard to the topic of the selection and related vocabulary, but also know what their schema is in regard to the coding and word analysis skills and strategies, as well as their schema for comprehension skills and strategies and their knowledge of text structure. We have already discussed decoding and word analysis and vocabulary development and how our instruction needs to address that, and we will be addressing instruction to develop comprehension skills and strategies. But what is and how do we develop knowledge of text structure? Let's look at the next slide to gain a better understanding of text structure. Even though this piece is riddled with nonsense words, were you able to get a sense of what might be going on? Were you able to determine that this was a narrative, story-like format or structure? What tipped you off? This is your knowledge of text structure. Where did it come from? Here is another nonsense passage. Again, it is impossible to determine the exact meaning of this unless you happen to know what a J-spot or Wexit is. But did you get the sense that 2 things are being compared? What tipped you off? Was this a narrative or expository text? Again, how did you acquire this knowledge of schema about these text structures? There are several different types of expository text structure. Compare and contrast is just one. We will look at other types when we explore instruction dealing with informational text. But the bottom line is that students need to be familiar with various text structures. They need to know that a narrative text structure, for example, tells a story. It usually involves several story elements such as characters, setting, problems, attempts to solve the problems, climax or solution, and a resolution. Expository text is different. If children approach an informational text thinking that they will find a story with characters trying to solve a problem, they will be very mistaken, very confused, and probably have a difficult time constructing meaning. So knowledge about text structures and the ability to apply that knowledge or schema appropriately to a given text is very important. Speaking of text, this is the second factor involved in the interactive process of constructing meaning. With any selection, teachers must always consider the text itself. In many reading series, publishers will offer smaller books written at different levels of difficulty, but still all covering the same topic. Let's take, for example, the following 2 slides from Gunning. Both are about the same topic, but differ in regard to difficulty. Consider the points on this slide to identify the features that makes one selection more challenging than the other. Please read this and supply the missing word or words if you think there is more than one answer. Now, do the same with this. DRP stands for Degrees of Reading Power. This is a quick, simple measure of literacy skills meant to measure a student's comprehension by looking at his overall ability to understand and critically absorb passages of text. Was it a bit more difficult supplying a word for this passage? Although both passages were about the same topic, their style or presentation varied considerably. Besides the differences stated on this slide, teachers must also consider other factors that play into style, such as how well is the text itself, especially informational text, written. When challenging vocabulary or concepts are introduced, does the author support the reader through context clues and/or text features, such as footnotes, boldface type, glossary, illustrations, or photographs? As you can tell from this slide, the second passage was obviously more challenging, and as a result, the reader's abilities to deal with this passage successfully also varied. Now that we have touched on the first 2 factors, the reader and the text, the only other piece in this interactive process is the context, or basically the purpose behind reading. As you know, depending on your purpose, or what you need to do with the text that you are reading, impacts your approach and mindset with the task. A reader will read something with a greater attention to detail and comprehension if he has to do a presentation on the information, or answer questions about it, or discuss it with peers. You certainly do not need to give this degree of attention or concentration to something you are reading for leisure. So, what is comprehension? It is the process of building a connection between what we know and what we do not know, or the new and the old. With these 3 quotes in mind, each points to the importance of the reader's prior knowledge that he brings to the text. So, where does this prior knowledge come from? Prior knowledge, in a sense, is the compilation of our experiences and readings and writings, and as you can imagine, it is highly individualized. Since prior knowledge is so essential to successful comprehension, how can teachers find out what children do or don't know, or have misconceptions about? Any one of a number of pre-reading activities can be used. The knowledge rating scale that was explained to the vocabulary module is a prime candidate. As children rate their knowledge of key vocabulary from the selection and discuss their responses, the teacher can easily assess strengths and weaknesses in their background knowledge. KWL charts are another powerful tool. As children list and discuss what they already know about a topic and generate statements about what they want to find out, teachers can again assess their prior knowledge and any misconceptions they might have, and then plan accordingly. Anticipation guides, with which you are very familiar, and follow-up discussions can be another vehicle to reach this goal. Even our comprehension of the same material can change over time, depending on new additions or changes in our prior knowledge or schemata. So you can see that the construction of meaning is a highly personal matter. Let's take a break before we move on to Part 2.